Well, functional interface were introduced in Java 8. Alright, and functional interface is nothing but an interface that contains exactly one abstract method is known as functional interface. Well, consider the code snippet here. My functional interface is an interface and it contains exactly one abstract method, that is execute method. Well, as we know that whenever we define a method in an interface, by default that method is abstract, right? So we don't have to again mention the abstract keyword in a method. Alright, so just remember, a functional interface is an interface that contains exactly one abstract method. Well, functional interface can have any number of default and static methods but can contain only one abstract method. Well, consider the code snippet again over here. Interface, my functional interface is a functional interface. It contains default and static methods, but it contains exactly one abstract method, that is execute method. So functional interface is nothing but an interface that contains any number of static and default methods but contains exactly one abstract method. Well, we can use a Java 8 provided add functional interface annotation to mark an interface as a functional interface. Well, let's go ahead, let's create one example. Well, here I am going to create one interface. Let's call it as my functional interface. Okay, and in order to make this interface as a functional interface, we have to define one abstract method. For example, let's say void print something like this, and I'm going to pass a parameter something like message. Okay, so this is nothing but our functional interface, because functional interface is an interface, it contains exactly one abstract method. Alright, perfect. Now in order to mark this interface as a functional interface, we can use add functional interface annotation from java.lang package. Well, basically this annotation we are introduced in Java 8 to mark the interface as a functional interface. Well, if you know that this interface is going to be a functional interface, then you can ignore this annotation. Alright, otherwise if you want to explicitly mark this interface as a functional interface, then you can go ahead and use add functional interface annotation. And if you try to add another method, for example, let's say void display something like this, then this will give a compile time error, because you are here using add functional interface annotation to mark this interface as a functional interface, and functional interface is nothing but an interface, it contains exactly one abstract method, right? But here we are trying to add one more abstract method. Okay, we are totally added two abstract methods. That's why it is giving a compile time error here, because functional interface contains exactly one abstract method, right? So let's go and let's remove this method, and now this is a valid functional interface because it contains exactly one abstract method. Well, functional interface can contain any number of default and static methods. For instance, let's say default void m1 is the method name, and default method contains a body, right? Let me put one sys out over here, and let's say default method. And functional interface can contain any number of static methods, right? Static void, let's say m2, and let's put one sys out, and let's say static method. Alright, perfect. Well, by looking into this functional interface, you can easily understand that functional interface is an interface. It can contain any number of default and static methods, but it should contain only one abstract method. And this is how we basically define our own functional interface. Alright, great. Now let's go and let's check out some of the Java 8 provided predefined functional interfaces, and we will also see how to use some of the predefined functional interfaces with an example. Well, let's head over to the browser first, and in a new tab just type java.util.function. Alright, so in Java 8 basically this package is introduced, that is java.util.function package. Well, functional interfaces provides a target types for Lambda expressions and method references. So basically we use a Lambda expression to implement a functional interfaces, and we assign a Lambda expression as a value to the reference variable, right? Reference variable in this case a functional interfaces. Alright, so basically we use a functional interfaces as a target types for Lambda expressions and method references. Well, here you can see a list of functional interfaces. So these are basically predefined functional interfaces were introduced in Java 8. And now what we're going to do is we're going to see some of the frequently used predefined functional interfaces with an example. Okay, so first we're going to take a look into function interface. So let me open in a new tab. Well, function interface is a functional interface, and you can see it is a generic basically, and it takes two parameters. This is the type of the input to the function, and this is the type of the result of the function. And basically this function interface has a method called apply method basically, and it is an abstract method, and we need to provide implementation for abstract method. Okay, so you can see function interface basically represents a function that accepts one argument and produces the result. Alright, so let's go and let's see the example of this function interface so that you will understand better. Well, let's go to the IntelliJ IDEA and let's create a new package. Let's call it as functional and hit enter, and within a functional package let's create a new class and let's call it as function demo, and then within this class let's create a main method. Now what we're going to do is we're going to see how to use a functional interface using traditional way, and then we'll see how to use Lambda expression to implement functional interface. So let's create a class over here, and let's say function impl is a class name. It implements function interface, and if you can see here, function interface is from java.util.function package. So let's choose this and let's pass two parameters because function is a functional interface and it is annotated with add functional interface annotation, right? And this functional interface represents a function that accepts one argument and produces the result. Alright, and it has an abstract method called apply. It takes one argument and it produces the result. Okay, it basically takes our input parameter and it will return the output parameter. So let's see first a traditional way. And here function is the generic interface, so we need to pass two parameters. Let's say string is the first parameter and it is the input, and second parameter let's pass the integer. Well, this example is basically take the string as an input and return the length of the input string. Alright, now let's go and let's implement the abstract method. So just mouse over it, implement functions and choose apply, hit OK, and here what we're going to do is we're going to basically return the length of the string. Okay, great. Now go to the main method, and here let's create an object of this class and let's call this apply method. So here I'm going to simply create an object of functional impl class, and then here I'm going to call apply method, and I'm going to simply pass a string as a Ramesh. Okay, now we want to print the result of this apply method, right? So here what I'm going to do is I'm going to use sysout and simply pass this method call. Okay, this will print the result of this apply method. So let me run the program and let me show you the result, and there we go. The length of the string Ramesh is 6, right? So this is how basically we use a traditional way to implement a function interface and provide the implementation for this apply abstract method. Okay, so this is a traditional way, and if you can see, we need to write a lot of code in order to implement this interface and in order to override this single method and provide the implementation, right? We need to write a lot of code basically. Now let's go and let's see how to use a Lambda expression to implement this function interface. Okay, it's pretty simple. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to simply comment out this code, and I'm going to copy this function and paste it here, and let's convert this function into Lambda expression. So first of all, get rid of this annotation and assign this function to the functional interface. In our case, function is a functional interface, right? So let me simply copy this. Alright, and let's have a variable name, something like function. Okay, now let's get rid of some of the unnecessary parts. So public is not required, and also the name is not required because lambda expression is an anonymous function. We don't have to provide a name to the lambda expression, and also we no need to provide a return type over here, and here we need to provide the arrow symbol, and then we provide a semicolon at the end of the lambda expression. So this is your lambda expression basically. Now we can simplify this lambda expression even more. For example, if the lambda expression body contains only one statement, then we can also remove the open and close curly braces. So simply let me remove this, and if you can see here, return keyword, so we can also remove this return keyword because Java compiler is smart enough to identify the return type of the function. So let's remove this return from here. Now this is the lambda expression. Okay, this is a simplified lambda expression. Now let's go and let's call the apply method, and let's pass the input as a Ramesh. Okay, and also put this statement in a system out.println so that we can print the result. Now let's run the program and let's see the output, and there we go. Okay, so the lambda expression that we have created to implement functional interface is working as expected. Well, if you can see the lines of code over here, without lambda expression we need to write a lot of code here. For example, we need to create a class which implements this interface, and we need to override the method, and we need to provide the implementation, and again we need to create an instance of this class, and then we need to call its method, right? So we need to write basically a lot of code. But by using lambda expression, if you look at here, only we need 2 lines of code. Okay, so using lambda expression we have written only 2 lines of code. So this 2 lines of code have done the job of all this much of code. Okay, so basically lambda expression, it simplifies a lot, right? It reduces a lot of code here. All right, so it is always recommended whenever you have functional interface, then try to use lambda expression. Okay, now we have seen how to use functional interface. So whenever you have a requirement to take an input and return the output, then you can go ahead and use functional interface. All right, great. Now let's take a look into consumer functional interface. Well, consumer functional interface, it is a generic interface, and it takes a single type here, and this type is basically input to the operation. All right, and consumer functional interface basically represents an operation that accepts a single input argument and returns a no result. Okay, and this consumer functional interface has a method, abstract method called accept method. So we are going to basically implement this accept method, and this accept method takes a single input argument and it does not return anything. Okay, so whenever you have a requirement to take the input and just print that input, then you can go ahead and use consumer functional interface. So basically consumer functional interface will consume the input argument, it won't return anything. Okay, so let's see the example of it. Well, right click on the package, new, and then choose Java class. Let's give class name as consumer demo, hit enter. Now first we're going to see the traditional way how we can implement the consumer functional interface, and then we'll see how we can use a lambda expression to implement the consumer functional interface. So let's create a class and let's call it as consumer. IMPL is a class name, it implements consumer functional interface, and look at here, consumer functional interface is from java.util.function package, and it is a generic interface, so we have to pass the type. Alright, so here we are going to pass the type as a string, and then let's implement its method. So if you can go inside consumer functional interface, it has a method called accept. Okay, it basically accepts the input and it does not return anything. Alright, now in this example what we're going to do is we're going to accept the string and we simply print that string to the console. Alright, now let's go and let's implement the accept method over here, and let's put the sysout and let's print this string, that is yes. So let me rename this, let's call it as input. Alright, now we have used a class to implement consumer functional interface. Now go inside consumer demo class and let's create a main method. Within a main method, let's create an object of consumer IMPL class. So here I am going to simply say consumer equal to new consumer IMPL, and let's call the accept method, and let's pass the string, let's say Ramesh, or let's say hello world. All right, perfect. Now let's run the program and let's see how this works. And if you can see here, hello world. Alright, so this is how basically we implement a consumer functional interface using traditional way. Okay, so we create a class which implements consumer interface, and we simply override its method and we provide the implementation for its method, and then we create an object of this class and then we call its method, right? So this is how we write the code using traditional way. Now let's go and let's see how to use a Lambda expression to implement consumer functional interface. Well, it's pretty simple. So what we're going to do is we're going to simply copy this method and we convert this method into Lambda expression. Well, let me simply copy this method and paste within a main method and get rid of this @override annotation. And as we know that we assign a Lambda expression to the functional interface, so let's copy this reference and paste it over here. Now we have assigned this block of code to the functional interface. Let's make this method as a Lambda expression. So here we have already consumer, so let me simply comment out this code. Okay, and here public is not makes sense in case of Lambda expression, because public makes sense in case of method or variable, okay, instance variable, but Lambda expression is not belong to any class or object, so we can remove the public access modifier from here. And Lambda expression don't have name because Lambda expression is an anonymous function, so just get rid of this function name as well. And what remains here, void. So we don't have to specify a return type to this Lambda expression because Java compiler is smart enough to identify the return type by looking into the return type of this accept method. So get rid of this return type from here, and then let's put the arrow symbol over here, and then finally let's put the semicolon at the end of the Lambda expression. Now this is your Lambda expression. Okay, now let's simplify one further. So this Lambda expression body contains exactly one statement, so we can also get rid of this open and close curly braces. So let me quickly remove this. Alright, and if you can see here type, so we can also remove this string type from here because Java compiler is smart enough to identify the type for this parameter. Okay, so Java compiler will basically look into this accept method and its parameter type here. For example, the parameter type is string, right? So Java compiler will automatically identify the type of this parameter, so get rid of this parameter type. Now this is the simplified version of Lambda expression. Now let's go and let's call the accept method over here, consumer dot, and then call accept, and then simply pass hello world. Perfect. Now let's run the program and let's see how this works. And there we go, hello world is printed in a console. Well, if you can see the lines of code here, without using Lambda expression we have to write a lot of code. For instance, we need to create a class which implements consumer functional interface, and then we need to override this abstract method, and we need to provide the implementation, isn't it? And again we need to create object of this class, and then we need to call the method. Well, if you can see here, using Lambda expression we can reduce a lot of code. Well, here we have written 2 lines of code using Lambda expression, and without Lambda expression we have written this much of code, right? So Lambda expression basically reduces a lot of code, right? Yeah, that's it. I hope we understood how to use a consumer functional interface and how to implement consumer functional interface using Lambda expression. Well, basically consumer functional interface, it takes an input and it does not return anything. Okay, and this is how we use a Lambda expression to implement the consumer interface. Now let's take a look into supplier functional interface. Well, supplier functional interface is a generic interface. You can see here we need to pass a type, okay, and this type is basically the result supplied by this supplier functional interface. And supplier functional interface has a method called get method, right? So we basically use a Lambda expression to implement this get method, and this get method does not take any parameter. It does not take any input. and it should return a result to the client. Okay, so let's go and let's see how to use a supplier functional interface. Well, basically supplier functional interface, it supplies some data to the client. Okay, so let's go to IntelliJ IDEA and let's create an example to demonstrate supplier functional interface. So let's create a class and let's call it as supplier demo. Well, as usual, first we'll see the traditional way, and then bit later we'll see how we can use a Lambda expression to implement the supplier functional interface. So let's create a class and let's call it as supplier IMPL, and this implements supplier functional interface. And make sure that you choose a supplier functional interface from java.util.function package, and then this is generic, so we have to pass the type, right? So in this case we are going to create an example to return the current date time. Okay, for that let's pass the local date time here. Okay, local date time as a type. Now let's override the get method and let's provide the implementation. Well, we simply need to return the current date time, right? So for that let's call the local date time and then call its method now. Okay, so this will basically return the date and time, current date and time. Okay, simply save it and go to the supplier demo class. Within this class let's create a main method and let's create an object of this supplier functional interface implementation over here. Let's call it as supplier and then new and then supplier IMPL. Alright, and simply put this out. Alright, and then call the supplier object here and then call get method. That's it. This will print the current date time, right? So let's run the program and let's see how this works. And there we go. Alright, it means that we have successfully implemented supplier functional interface using traditional way. Now let's see how we can use a Lambda expression to implement the supplier functional interface. Well, let me use this method and let me convert this method into Lambda expression. So here I'm going to comment out this code first and then I'm going to paste the method over here and then simply get rid of this annotation and let's assign the Lambda expression to the functional interface like this, and let's remove the unnecessary parts. So get rid of this public, get rid of method name, and then get rid of this return type is not required, and let's put the arrow symbol and put the semicolon at the end of the Lambda expression. Now this is your Lambda expression. Alright, and we can also simplify this Lambda expression further. For example, this Lambda expression body contains exactly one statement, so we can also get rid of this open and close curly braces, and also we can remove this return keyword from here. Alright, perfect. So this is your simplified Lambda expression, and then simply call sysout and then call get method. Okay, now let's go and let's run the program and let's see how this works. And there we go. This is working as expected, right? So this is how basically we use the Lambda expression to implement supplier functional interface.